Hey guys, welcome to the Fantasy Endgame. I'm here to talk about how to play fantasy baseball and win, whether you're new to the game, transitioning from football or another sport, or maybe you've played before, but you really want to get better. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the main points to remember. All right, so the first thing, you'll hear this no matter what fantasy sport you play, but it's especially important in baseball. Know your league, know the settings, know the rules, know the format. There are a lot more different varieties in baseball than there are for, say, football. So the main format that you'll hear is 5x5 Roto, a Roto league, which is the traditional way to play. That means you're going to have categories and you're going to place according to how you do in each category. So when we talk about 5x5, that means 5 for hitting and 5 for pitching. So in hitting, traditionally, the categories are going to be home runs, RBIs, runs scored, stolen bases, and batting average. So those first four are what we call counting stats, which means you can count up the totals of each statistic. And of course, batting average is an average. It averages out based on all your players and how well they hit. In pitching, it has always been wins, saves, ERA, whip, and strikeouts. Now, there are a lot more different variations when you talk about pitching these days, but those are still the kind of standbys that you'll see. Wins are kind of dying down, so here's the other thing is if you do play a 5x5 Roto League, you kind of need to know still if it's a traditional league or if it has been updated, because a lot of leagues are going away from wins and onto quality starts, okay? Because wins are a lot harder to come by these days. Managers using pitching staffs completely differently. What about for closers? Same thing. We don't see the one guy who goes out there and gets a lot of saves. So a lot of times also the way bullpens are used, middle relievers are even more important. Check to see if your league uses saves or if they use saves plus holds, or maybe even just holds. There's a lot of different ways that can be done. So you absolutely need to know how you're going to play before you attack your draft and your roster. Points leagues are becoming a little bit more popular. They're not quite as popular as Roto, so I'm going to talk more about Roto leagues in this video. But even for a points league, it's a little bit more straightforward, right? Your guys get points for how they do. So usually, for example, a single is 1 point, a double is 2 points, a triple is 3 points, a home run will get you 4, maybe 5 points as a little bonus. So you just rack up the most points, and so basically, the better the player, the more points you get. But even so, you have to check what platform you use, because sites like ESPN, Yahoo, CBS, Fantrax, they have different scoring systems, which sounds crazy, but it's true. Some of them are very different, so the same player can have completely different value in one system versus the other. So you always have to check your league settings and know all those details before you play. All right, you know your league settings, you're ready to play, to draft, and build a roster. What do you need to know in order to win? The first thing is balance. Balance is key. So you're essentially drafting two different rosters together. You have your hitters and you have your pitchers. You have to fill out one per position. Again, a lot of different variations on how roster construction is made and league size, but traditionally one for each position, right? The infield, 3 outfielders. At pitcher, you might need some starters, relievers. You could just use anything, but you have to draft a group of hitters and pitchers that will both compete. You can't just have one and expect to come close to winning. All right, so you have to balance out your offense and your pitching. You can't go all offense in your draft and then just hope to pick up pitchers off the waiver wire. That's not going to do it for you. All right, so you have to kind of weigh the balance there. And also with categories, you're going to have to make sure you don't go too heavy in one and totally forget on the other. You know, there is such a thing as punting categories. You can just say, forget steals, I don't need steals. You're kind of giving yourself an uphill battle from the beginning. It is possible to win without winning a category. It's just a little bit harder. So generally try to balance things out. All right, you're in a Roto League. What do you want to do to win all those categories? You're probably not going to win every single one, but here's how you can do it best. Chase upside in each category. What do I mean by upside, right? All your players should have upside, but what you want to do, especially in those counting stats, the ones that are harder to get, like steals, as I mentioned, like home runs, you want to look for the guy who has that boom potential. All right, so in fantasy football, it's a week-to-week proposition. Guy might go off in 1 week and do nothing the next, help you sometimes, not the other. Baseball, it is a marathon, right? Games almost every day, and matchups, individual matchups, aren't quite as important. You need a guy who's going to be able to get you consistent production, But when you look at something like a home run or a steal, you can't predict those. You need a guy who can do that on a semi-regular basis, and especially something as scarce as steals, you want somebody who has that 20 steal potential, that 30 steal potential. So look at a guy, if I said that there's a player who hit 262 with 11 home runs, 56 RBIs, and that he was a top 75 hitter last year in fantasy, you'd be surprised. But why? Because he stole 30 bases. Just on his speed alone, and he scored some runs. That is something that made him very valuable, more valuable than a lot of guys who did better in every other category. All right, so you have to look for the guys who have that upside in each category. A guy who could lead you by himself near or at the top of home runs, of RBIs, of steals, etc. For pitching, it's a little different. Your ratios matter more. There's not as many counting stats, and wins and saves, or saves and holds and quality starts, as I talked about earlier. But those numbers are for different types of pitchers. You got starters and relievers. So it's a little harder to do what I say, chase upside in all the categories, but you need at least one lockdown closer, one guy who will be near the top of the saves list, one guy that you feel can pile up some wins. And then strikeouts, that's the easiest thing to chase. Look for pitchers who will get a lot of strikeouts, and usually the good things on the other stats will follow. All right, and then finally, whether you're drafting or you're playing in season on the waiver wire, setting your lineups, as I said, you want somebody who can pile up those stats on a regular basis. So you always have to keep in mind playing time matters. Obviously, you want the players who have that talent and that potential, but if they're not on the field, it doesn't matter, right? You need somebody who's got a path to playing time. You need a pitcher who's in the rotation, who's going to get those starts, not just a spot start here and there, because then you're guessing as to who's going to start, and you don't want to have to be streaming every single week just to try to get pitching stats. You don't want a guy who's going to hit you a home run one game and then be on the bench the next game. That doesn't help you, all right? So playing time is key. Always check lineups. Lineup order also matters. The guys who are hit at the top of the lineup are going to get more at-bats than the guys at the bottom of the lineup, right? It's proven fact that they will deliver more fantasy value. All right, so always check to see who are the players that manager is going to depend on, and what teams tend to keep the same lineups rolling out there and not have a platoon where you have players playing every other night. Last but not least, stay active. I already said it's a marathon, not a sprint. You'll hear that cliche over and over if you play fantasy baseball. It is completely different from football, where you have to treat every week completely different based on buys, injuries, matchups, weather, what have you. Okay, in baseball, it's a grind, but you can't set your lineup and forget it. It's easy to do that, right? Because, maybe you don't check your lineup every day, and that's okay because you don't need to, but you can't just ignore it. You have to look at trends. You have to play the waiver wire. You once in a while will have to stream pitchers, and that's why we're going to be here to help you all season long with streaming recommendations, waiver wire pickups, and the like. But the more active you are, especially toward the middle and end of the season, the biggest advantage you have over your fellow competitors and league mates is that you are always staying one step ahead of the game. All right, guys, I hope this helps. Looking forward to helping you all season long for fantasy baseball. Of course, keep it locked here on the Fantasy Endgame, where your source for fantasy baseball and football knowledge to help you win.